Thank you all for coming out on a weeknight, pretty late. Myself, I'm kind of become used to Zoom meetings, so it's always nice and shocking to have meetings in person, but I appreciate your attendance. So I'm just going to do a little bit of I'm going to do a little bit about project introduction, and then I will see if you guys are willing to introduce yourself. That's good. I will say that I am recording the meeting. My note takers aren't here, and the clients, NEIWPCC, and LISS want people who weren't able to come tonight to be able to watch the presentation part. So I'm going to do a presentation for about a half of an hour. Hopefully, try to go through some slides pretty quickly so I can put all you guys to sleep. And then I'd like to, if people have conversation, comments, and feedback, I'd like to have there be an open conversation. That part I'm not going to put on the YouTube. That we're just going to hold on to that for our own note taking because we don't have any note takers. So this is why don't you go ahead and go to the next slide. So I do have to put this on all the presentations contractually. So this does come originally from money from EPA, which then goes through Long Island SoundStudy, and then a group called NEIWPCC out of Lowell, Mass, who contracts with me. And so even though that funding came from there, any conclusions that are in this report haven't been sort of vetted by those agencies. It's not official policy of any of those agencies. We'll go to the next slide. Okay, so again, thank you for coming out. My name is Jonathan Clow. I am from Central Vermont and really a computer modeler by trade, and working on getting some of the model results out there so they can actually start to make an impact on people. And my team, my coworkers here weren't able to make it. Vicki O'Neill, who as of very recently was a NEIWPCC environmental analyst and with Long Island SoundStudy, she just got a new job with Audubon that she started yesterday. So so she's not on this project anymore. This project is wrapping up in a month anyway. So she was my primary manager. And then Elizabeth Bornstein, who many of you may already know, is a LISS, she has a long title, Sustainable and Resilient Communities Extension Professional for Suffolk County. So she works with Long Island Sound for Suffolk County, trying to, again, get community outreach, be a liaison between the Long Island SoundStudy and the community. And she's under the weather tonight, so we convinced her she didn't have to come. So a little bit of the project background is that about a little under 10 years ago, I was funded to do sea level rise affecting marshes modeling, which is a model that I've been working on for many years for the entirety of coastal New York. Those results, we did two different projects funded through NYSDEC, and those project results were basically very detailed model results, but we had all the data available, but you kind of needed GIS expertise. And Vicki saw that these resources were there, kind of explaining what might happen under sea level rise, under uncertainty, where marshes might migrate to, which marshes are more vulnerable than others. And so Vicki saw that opportunity to try to bring those results to the community. And so there are two parts of that. The first part is an online tool that we completed earlier this year, which you can go and you can look at Marsh modeling results down, and you can also look at tax parcel results and see exactly where these marshes are planning to be and are not planning to be throughout Long Island Sound. And then the second part was to team with various communities across the Long Island SoundStudy area, and also coastal New York. And so this is one of 5 marsh conservation plans that we produced over 2 phases of the project. And so that's the basic background of the project. So if you'd be willing to, I'd love to have you introduce yourself. And I don't know, Michael, you want to go first, and we can just kind of go this way? No, we can go back, and you can be first or last. You got to choose.
I'm trying to be good.
Try to remember the name.
I'm trying to avoid making any bad jokes. My name is Mike Kaufman. I'm a resident village municipal, and I'm a Suffolk County official in a couple of different
My name is David Averill. I'm a reporter for the Smithtown News newspaper.
I'm Nick Gibbons, Summit County Parks Department. I oversee the environmental program.
Joe Ballhofer, I'm a resident, the head of the harbor and a village official.
Yeah.
Nancy Featherston, 53, a resident on Long Beach Spit, which encloses the harbor. And it's my interest, and I also have graduate courses in coastal and oceanographic and fishery management of interest.
Hi everyone, my name is Sarah Healy. I'm the regional coordinator for DEC's Long Island Nitrogen Action Plan.
I'm Chris Eagler. I work with the DEC as Long Island SoundStudy regional coordinator.
I'm Brooke Ferreira. I work for Smithtown as an environmental technician.
Hi, I'm David Barnes. I'm the director of the Department of Environmental and Waterways for Smithtown.
Doug Dalgard, I'm mayor of the head of the harbor, and we go around Stony Brook Harbor to the north and to the east. We have the Gristmill Pond that feeds into the harbor.
Just before we go on, we have worked with Jonathan and Elizabeth at the Long Island SoundStudy, and Mayor Dalgard. We have representatives from Town Brookhaven, Smithtown, Middleton Harbor, Middleton Nessequa. Something Parks has been involved a little. So we really tried to, because there's so many municipalities here in villages that border this. Right, we tried to invite all of them into the study early on, work with Elizabeth. So I don't know how much you know that, but it was good. It was great. Some people took it and that's fine.
Yeah, I think that to a certain extent was another one of Vicky's vision for the project, as she communicated with me about it, was also that these marsh conservation plans could bring together a diverse group of people to talk that wouldn't otherwise be talking. And maybe if you have get some degree of consensus or agreement, or you get a large group to push forward on some of these on concrete plans, that it's more likely to be funded. So I think that's another piece of this, and I know Elizabeth's going to continue to be following up with this in that regard. So I guess we can go to the next slide. Oh, right, yeah, I think that pretty much. Oh no, you already did go to the next slide. Sorry. Right. So the as I said, the first part were these model results from SLAM, or the Sea Level Affecting Marshes model. And so what we've done is we've developed this online viewer that's kind of lightweight. I mean, sometimes you go to GIS platforms and it take a really long time to load, and they're very complicated. So we tried to make it user-friendly and load quickly. And Vicky and we worked together to sort of define the major marshes all across coastal New York on Long Island Sound. And so you can kind of zoom in on any of these places where there are already large marshes and look and see what the effects are under sea level rise under different tax parcels. And so that is at the URL here, warrenpinnacle.com LI maps. If we have time and interest, I can demonstrate that afterwards. And then the second piece is the development of the marsh conservation plans, and we have the draft, which you should hopefully have a copy of, from October of this year. If any of you don't have a copy of it, just leave me your email address and I'll make sure that we can get you a copy of that. And then this is a community workshop. Here we are, right in phase 3. And we're going to be getting any community feedback that we can on these and revising the plans by the end of this calendar year. Go ahead. Thanks. Right, and this is our stakeholder group. The text is probably pretty small to see, but to David's point, we had the town of Smithtown, and also I'd be willing to share all the slides with you afterwards if you'd like. But we have the town of Smithtown, Brookhaven, Save the Sound. So it was a combination. EPA was there, NYSDEC, Suffolk County. So we had a lot of people these were all people that attended one of 3. We had 3 2-hour meetings. When we talked with the first meeting, we discussed what the scope of the project would be and the framework of the report, what that would look like. And so geographic scope, what do we want to cover in the report? And then we solicited a lot of data from people. And the second one, we had sort of start to integrate those data and get some feedback on that. And the third one, we had a draft of a report to comment on. Go to the next slide. So the framework that we came up with is fairly straightforward. Starting out in the report, when you look at it, there's an overview of what marsh resources are there. Then there's a discussion of what are the benefits, why do we care about the marshes, what are the benefits that are providing both to humans and to ecology, what are the existing threats that we know of, then how are we going to deal with these threats. Let's look at an overview of marsh conservation planning, and then some more specific discussion of Stony Brook Harbor recommendations, and then some funding sources and some appendices. Okay, so part of the reason that NYSDEC was so interested in including this site, once they found a community group that was willing to take it on, is that there are tremendous marsh resources there. 186, according to the National Wetland Inventory, there's approximately 186 acres of low marsh and 166 acres of high marsh or regularly flooded marsh. Now, the way that National Wetland Inventory defines that is that a low marsh is flooded generally daily. That would be probably oftentimes a Spartina alterniflora. The high marsh is more often a brackish marsh. It's not necessarily flooded daily. A Spartina patens, for example. And they have different ecosystem services that they provide, and they have different vulnerabilities to sea level rise. And so they're broken out on that basis. Okay. So again, this is a superlative. There's a lot of superlatives about Stony Brook Harbor. It is a Long Island SoundStudy stewardship area because of its environmental significance. There are known presence of many endangered and threatened species, including diamondback terrapin, several species of tern, osprey, piping plover, and salt marsh sparrow. Also, the New York State Department of State had designated it as a significant coastal fish and wildlife habitat, both in 1987 and 2005, stating it's one of the largest and most diverse coastal wetland ecosystems of the North Shore of Long Island, is important to many fish and wildlife species throughout the year. So now talk a little bit about, in terms of the overview of the marsh, we have to talk a little bit about the history of the marsh. And so this is, we have some aerial photography, and what we're not, these aerial photographs are not all tidally coordinated. I tried to take ones that were mostly taken at low tide. A lot of these were taken at low tide. So we're not necessarily looking at the persistence of the marsh, but how human behavior that's visible on some of these has changed the marsh. So you can see in 1947, there are marshes in Stony Brook Harbor in the north, central, and south portions. If you go to the next slide, so there's a really big impact from dredging that occurred in the 40s and the 50s, I believe.
Up to 62.
Up to 62, okay. In a thesis that a local student put together, estimated that over 70 acres of emergent wetlands were lost. And you can see, if we go back to 47 again for a minute, and then go back to 62. If you look up here, you can see the significant sand from dredging piles. Also this dredging took place with clamshell dredgers, which also releases a tremendous amount of sediment into the water column. So there was likely a very significant impact on oysters during that time. So that was a really a huge impact event. Go to the next slide. And then those kind of impact events continued into 1978 when you had the building up of Young's Island up here at the mouth of the harbor. And again, constructed from sand using dredging. The hydrodynamic modeling that we have suggests that it had a significant impact on tidal flow both in and out of the harbor. So there's a lot of impact going on through that time. And now we can go one more forward. and this is how it looks in 2013. So the impact from the dredging pile is not quite as obvious because you have some vegetation, growing in there, so you don't have these big white lines that you had in the previous documents, but you in the previous images, but you also don't have a lot of salt marsh habitat, especially to the north. So I think that history of human intervention is just a good sort of backdrop for considering marsh conservation and where to go forward. It's also important because when the state looks at marsh restoration, and they have very significant, LISS has very specific marsh restoration goals. The definition of restoration is there had to have been a marsh there previously. So knowing where there were marshes there previously actually improves your chance of getting funding in those circumstances. Then there's another study that was put together for NEIWPCC in 2015, where they looked at infrared photography from the 1970s. There was some infrared photography from the 1970s that was put together by the state in order to assess where the marshes were. It was tidally coordinated, meaning that they took the photographs as close to low tide as they could, so they could get a sense of it. And they did a very similar set. They took some new infrared photographs from the mid-2000s, and they interpreted them using the same methods to get a sense of what's happening. And so for this particular site, there was they looked at it in 3 different categories. They had intertidal marsh, which we would call low marsh. And you can see this sort of a decline there, a pretty significant decline from over 250 to under 200 acres. The high marsh also had a decline. It looks like from something like 60 to right about 50, maybe 65 to 50. And Phragmites, which is the invasive common reed, which probably in some cases might be included in the high marsh category if it's going to be lumped anywhere. That went from not very much to starting to be pushing 10 acres, it looks like.
Higher.
Well, right. This is the mid-2000s, and there's also the photo interpretation. The other thing I want to point out is that there is this study, wasn't perfect. The tidal coordination for low tide was sort of within an hour of low tide. That's a pretty big margin of error. So there are some questions about whether has there really been this. So you can see here south of Porpoise Channel, it looks like it's really broken up the intertidal marsh. And there's some question about whether that much breaking up did occur, or whether there's a little bit of an artifact there in terms of those results. Go to the next slide. Good. Okay, and then in terms of ownership, this is a little bit trying to do this. We have the public marshes are in blue, and so this big area here, it's hard to read what that polygon is, but this big area here is publicly owned. And then we have private, so some of the marshes are on private lands, some shards up here. Most of the marsh is publicly owned. Here's some marsh on private land. Then also over in West Meadow Creek, there's a lot of private conserved, thanks to the Ward Melville Heritage Organization, and so that is sort of, it's private, but it is being managed for ecology certainly and education purposes. So a lot of it is under the control of Ward Melville Heritage Organization and various public entities. And if you go to the viewer, you can click on any of these parcels and it'll tell you exactly who the owner is, whether it's a state, whether it's a town, it sort of varies. All right. And so why do we care about marshes? Probably this is not going to be news to a lot of you, but marshes are really considered powerhouses in terms of ecology. They're really significant bird habitat. They provide refuge from predators. They provide a tremendous amount of food through organic matter, sort of moving through the food web, through invertebrates, through game fish, up to, through forage fish, up to predator fish, up to charismatic, endangered predator birds. And they're also considered ecosystem engineers in that they sort of modify the system that they're around. They attract sediment, they attract organic matter that can then be used by the food web. And there, you know, I think I mentioned there are a number of rare and endangered species in this location that are supported either directly or indirectly by the marsh. So those are two, you know, habitat is really a big one. Another piece is water quality protection. Marshes actually can have a role in terms of filtering nutrients out of the water and helping to clean up the water. And they can also sequester carbon dioxide. They're considered good blue carbon contributors. So they have those benefits. On the other hand, if things become if there's too many nutrients, it can actually start to have deleterious impacts on the marshes, which I'll discuss coming up. But there's more in terms of benefits, in terms of the human-centered piece. I mean, I was just on the harbor today and saw someone, you know, working with binoculars to try to see various species. So there is a real benefit to recreation, as well as things like fishing, shell fishing, and swimming, and recreational boating. Having the marshes there provides a real scenic backdrop, as well as providing a lot of habitat for people to look at. So it is a draw in that case. And that's also just kind of speaks to sort of the political and culture and historic value of the marshes themselves. And at our meetings, several times, people called out the fact that this salt marsh habitat is significant and important to sort of just the sense of place that Stony Brook Harbor is. In the Ward Melville Heritage Organization includes an educational program, and it is also important to note that this was originally the ancestral territory of the Settlecot and Nissequogue Native Americans. Apologies if I mispronounced that. We don't have those in Vermont. We have different. We displaced different names, tribes.
Any Apaches?
No, I'm not gonna be able to pull up. We named our local park after it. I can't. Wampanoag. Anyway. So in terms of, so that's why we care about them, but now let's think, why do we think there are some threats to local marshes? And we worked with the stakeholder group to define what they thought the most important threats were. And one of the things that came up really high on the top was invasive species, especially common reed, Phragmites, and driving around, I drove around the harbor today, and I can certainly vouch for the fact that there's a lot there. Around the edges, it's unsightly. It's also in many cases it does not provide as good a habitat for a lot of different species. There are some species which thrive in Phragmites, but the native high marshes, Spartina patens, I think is considered generally to provide more habitat services. And there are others. Green crab is potentially a big issue in terms of the marsh itself. The invasive green crab will eat the rhizomes, eat away, so it creates a tremendous amount of erosion, and they're very hard to control. Japanese green crab, perennial pepperweed, and Japanese knotweed occur at the upper end. They're not particularly fond of salinity. They are tolerant of salinity, but they can't really compete in the same location. So in some cases, improving water flows and increasing salinity will help with that control. Then I'll talk about, why don't you go to the next slide, and I'll talk about some of these other ones. So we discussed the historic marsh loss trends before that we saw, and just a little bit more specificity in terms of that period from 74 to 2005, was that in West Meadow Creek, they saw an especially a conversion from high marsh to low marsh. indicating that either the land is subsiding to a certain extent or that there's some sea level rise or something's occurring that is causing some of that high marsh to become a low marsh. And we discussed Porpoise Channel and how that looked. It said south of Porpoise Channel, that study found over 50% of intertidal marsh had been lost. The northern Stony Brook Harbor, from that time forward, the marshes were fairly constant. As mentioned already, about 74 acres of those marshes were lost back in the 1940s. And the southern portion of the harbor had the largest increase in Phragmites habitat, which I think Mike was saying has continued, and the numbers are much higher than those acreage that are shown in this graph. So just kind of like a sense of what's happening in different parts of the study area. They're all evolving. The thing about marshlands, coastal wetlands, is that they are constantly evolving. They're at the edge of the water wave interface and storms, sedimentation rates. There's a natural ebb and flow usually, and I think we're just concerned that sometimes it seems more like an ebb than a flow. So some other ways to look at marsh relative vulnerability is to look at, this is some data from USGS, and I apologize, these aren't really readable, but I sort of translate them for you. So they look at the vegetated to unvegetated ratio. Actually, it's the unvegetated to vegetated ratio, so a high number is bad. It's how much of the area that is purportedly marsh is bare ground, unvegetated, versus how much actually has vegetation on it. And so this purple colors are the worst, and the green colors are the best. So there's really dense vegetation, West Meadow Creek, and the south of Porpoise Channel, thank you. South of Porpoise Channel is not doing as well. And then we also look at elevation, which this is sort of like a function of what's high marsh and what's low marsh. This is a high marsh, and you can see it has a high elevation. This is a low marsh, has low elevation. However, this elevation is extremely low, so it's more vulnerable. You kind of that's called marsh capital in terms of marsh modeling, how much elevation the marshes have above the waters around them. And if they have more marsh capital, then they are more able to withstand sea level rise. That's kind of what all the different, the suite of sea level rise affecting marshes models show. Next slide. And this is some results of that sea level affecting marshes model. And this is looking at a medium sea level rise scenario. So, but still it's a lot, about over a meter of sea level rise by the year 2100. And so, what we see is that so this is the current condition, and this is if you held everything else constant but added a meter of sea level rise. So one of the things you see is they have this low tidal category, which is unvegetated flats. That's going to be deeper. A lot of that low tidal category is gone, but we're more talking about marshes here. You can see with that amount of sea level rise, West Meadow Creek, the marshes are still pretty much there, but they now become low marshes, not high marshes. And this area here, in terms of erosion of marshed open water, south of Porpoise Channel seem to be the most vulnerable in terms of the simulations that we ran for this site. So another issue is our water quality issues. As I was saying before, marshes can filter nutrients out of the system, but what scientists have found is that when there are too many nutrients in the water, marshes stop growing as many roots. Probably because they don't need to grow as many roots in order to uptake nutrients, or some other factor, or they're just getting more nutrients from the water column than they are of the soil, and that causes erosion. So you have less roots, you have a storm, you have more erosion that occurs, and there's a lot of sources of nutrients, runoff from roads, lawns, and septic systems, a lack of acceptable circulation to move nutrients out. But that being said, really the water quality issues here aren't too bad. Now, one thing is that Stony Brook Harbor is not specifically monitored by Save the Sound, so they don't come in here and conduct monitoring. They don't give a grade to Stony Brook Harbor specifically. They do to a lot of the other estuaries down here. You can see some of these individual estuaries having different grades based on their water quality. But Stony Brook Harbor There it is, it doesn't have a grade. So it sort of falls into this B+ zone of the western basin. Also, we pulled some nitrogen data, and it's not too bad from what we understood. It sort of fluctuates between the good and the moderately impaired category. Nitrogen data will fluctuate a lot as the ebbs and flows. But still, to be optimal, the Suffolk County Sub-Watersheds Plan does recommend a 60% reduction in nitrogen. So it's a threat, but maybe not as bad as it is when you move further to the west. There's a lot more water quality issues that we're looking at. And sediment supply is really important for the study in 2021 looked at all sort of the marsh restoration, living shoreline projects, and looked at those against data for water, sea level rise that has been occurring, water temperature, sediment supply, all the data that they could get. And what they found, the number one importance for having these marsh restoration projects be successful is having an adequate sediment supply. So marshes need to be able to accumulate sediment in order to thrive. And as we discussed before, there's been some alteration of sediment deposition patterns by the construction of Young's Island historically. In general, the harbor does have an abundant sediment supply, but where the sediment settles is really sensitive to the local bathymetry. And so there, again, I'm going to refer to this hydrodynamic model that was put together by a local student back in 2001, which is a model that basically looks at sort of as the waves come in and as the waves go out, where is the sediment moving, where is it settling, the density of that. That's kind of what the sediment transport model means.
Jonathan, can I come into one second?
Please do.
The bottom thing about Gorgas, I knew the kid who put it together. It's based upon Larry Swanson's hydrodynamic models.
Yeah.
Participated in the 1990s. So you might want to change that. That's the real model is the 1990s, 1997, if I remember correctly.
Okay.
That Swanson did.
All right, I'll go back and look. I wonder if I was correct in the document, but not correct in the bullet. But I'll go back into the document and look at that.
I don't know if I ever sent it to you. That was the problem. I mean, the thing is masked into the computer program with other conclusions associated with it.
I don't remember. Maybe I only had the other. I might have had a summary of it right. I don't think I have that. I just had his thesis, and also in the book they discuss. And one of the things that they discuss in the book is that the depth of dredging is extremely important, and they looked at a scenario where they dredged greater than 6 feet, and they found significant impacts on sediment filling rate, salinity, and actually the wetting and drying of the marshes changed quite a bit when the depth went down quite a bit lower. So I think that is a consideration. Okay, and then looking at development around the site, this isn't really going to be a surprise to anybody, but back in 1954, if you look around the edges, you predominantly have farmland and forested area, very not dense residential at all. And if you come back to the current period, now it's hard to see in this projection, I apologize, but what we have is low density residential. And we're not really this is obviously taken at high tide, so we're not looking at the marshes here, we're looking at the area around it. You have the addition of a golf course here, a lot more houses dotted in there, the farms are gone, so there has been a change. There's been I don't know where, there's been some coastal hardening.
Not inside the harbor all that much. Most of it's been outside.
I don't know why it's there, sorry about that. But I think that's more just a general concern of what might happen in development. There we go. Now I remember. It's out of my notes. But generally, development can lead to coastal hardening if people are worried about protecting their houses under sea level rise, and that can cause a marsh freeze. It hasn't happened yet, and there's a lot of vertical relief here, so it may not necessarily happen. But residential development does produce a lot of additional nutrients to the water through septic systems, through lawn fertilizer and the like. And right, we were discussing I heard people discussing the Harbor Road culvert. And so this is kind of an additional threat, is the lack of the capability for water to flow where it should because it can't pass under roads. There's some views of the culvert. I drove over it today. Definitely choked with phragmites on both sides. I know the Village of Head of the Harbor is working to obtain funding to replace that. And the Nature Conservancy also assessed this and found the degree of tidal restriction to be severe. So if that culvert were to be properly sized and to allow aquatic organism and seawater to pass in there, then you would increase the salinity behind, and that would improve the speciation back there. It should really help with the phragmites that's on the other side.
Just as an aside, so Doug and I have been working on this for a couple of years now. What boils down to is dying marsh. It was within living memory a Spartina-dominated marsh. Now it is a Phragmites-dominated marsh. Even in the last year, the Phragmites invasion has increased significantly.
Yeah, and there's Phragmites on both sides of the culvert now, correct? Yeah.
Yeah.
So the culvert itself, will help to some degree, but the restoration of salinity and tidal flows there, it's
So that's the entire purpose of it. Widen and deepen it.
Yeah.
Put it in phase with the incoming tides, and hopefully, pump more salt water in. Right now, there's a deficit on the flood, and there's too much fresh water coming in.
Yeah.
The fresh water comes in from uphill. The topography of that landscape where the culvert is really fraught with problems. You're 150 feet up in the air when you're at Mauritius Road, and you're 0 feet when you get down to the culvert. So when we have severe rains, if you're getting more and more often,
Right.
you have fresh water running down into the tidal marsh,
Yeah.
reducing the salinity.
Yeah.
And you have the phragmites, because of the fresh water.
Right.
And it's choking 3.5 acres worth of that tidal marsh.
Yeah.
So we have a major problem with that. Now,
It's a
there's other
county
things that are
marsh.
going on that are better. I mean, there are things that are very positive. Corbett Park, which you're pointing to there,
Yes.
that's a town of Smithtown Park. And David and his team are working on reducing the sediment that's going down the hill. As I say, it's 150 feet. It's about the same height as Niagara Falls.
Yeah.
So you can imagine how much water comes down there. They'll be adding check dams and other things to slow the water down and
That's great.
reduce the amount of erosion that comes into the southern end. The southern end is very, very, it's just, I guess the depth is less than 3 feet. The average of the whole harbor is 3 feet. But you can walk around 1 foot, 2 foot, very shallow.
Yeah. And that's preventing the circulation as well. If you have more, the culvert, it may not be the panacea to solve all of these problems, but it will help flush the water in and out.
It will
A
help.
lot more salinity.
It will help.
Absolutely. I was just at that park today and scanned that QR code, but then I didn't have a signal, so I didn't get it.
Oh, when you were at the culvert today, you also saw the Japanese knotweed?
I should have. We have it
Why?
like crazy in Vermont, but I had blinders on for the Phragmites.
Yeah, it's lining the road.
Okay, yeah,
Japanese knotweed.
yeah. We're working on that in Vermont quite a bit. That would be good. The head of our conservation commission, which I'm part of, wants to get town goats to eat the knotweed, but that's a different story. Apparently, goats are really big in terms of knotweed prevention. All right, so there are a number of different general options for how you can do marsh conservation planning. And we only went so deep into plans. I mean, there are a lot of different sub areas here, and so we didn't, get into like engineering. Just more like recommendations of here's things you might want to think about in terms of it. But we talked about marsh restoration and augmentation, which I will discuss. Actually, I think maybe go to the next slide. We just jump into the different. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so as I was saying, marsh restoration is the restoration of marshes that were historically in place. Long Island SoundStudy has a goal of restoring 515 acres by 2035. They're only about a third of the way there, but they've been picking up progress. So they're really funding a lot of marsh restoration projects. And so, again, as I said, it requires you knowing that marshes were there historically, and you certainly have that circumstance to the north of Stony Brook Harbor. Another option in terms of sort of augmentation or part of marsh restoration, which is really happening a lot, is oyster reef construction. Of course, you have to be very careful to ensure that sediment goes to the right place, and you have to avoid harvesting because Stony Brook Harbor is not certified for oyster harvesting. So there are some potential drawbacks as well. But there was a in nearby, up in Connecticut, and I can't remember the name of the town, it's in the notes, but where they did a study and they put artificial oyster reefs next to some marshes that were declining, and they found both a decrease in the waves that hit the marshes. I think the wave energy was reduced by 60%, but they also found that the marshes were accreting more rapidly because of the sediments produced by those oyster reefs. So if it's done in the right way, and I think that our stakeholders, mentioned that there were concerns that it be done the right way, and that all the sediment that the oyster reefs are producing don't go right into the channel, and that we don't have a problem with locals harvesting and having problems that way. If it's done in the right way, it can be beneficial. And then another piece are potentially living shorelines, which is basically a building up of, instead of building, in places where they were going to build hard walls because they have problems with erosion and they need flood protection, it's sort of building kind of a steep marsh surface and vegetating it. And the benefit you have there also is that as the marshes become flooded more frequently, they tend to accumulate more sediment. And so you have an evolving system that can potentially work in that way. For living shorelines, there is state guidance from New York State Department of State and NYSDEC available. So it's something, the state is very interested in marsh restoration and living shorelines. And in fact, very recently, legislation was passed requiring NYSDEC to give preference to living shorelines and natural measures over hardened shorelines. So these are things to bear in mind. And in terms of managing the current marsh resources, we talked a little bit about water quality improvements, improving the sediment supply, how important that is. But another, invasive species management we talked a little bit about, but another thing that is really cutting edge is cutting runoffs, shallow drainage ditches into these marshes, especially marshes that are having issues that you were talking about in terms of too much fresh water. You have freshwater ponding. When you have freshwater ponding, you have invasive species occur. You can also have the marshes can subside, and so in those circumstances, digging these shallow channels to allow both the salt water to come in and the fresh water to go out has had some significant benefits. There are a number of pilot projects that are going on across New York that are looking at that.
It's actually Suffolk County policy now.
Oh, is it? Yeah.
As part of the vector control marsh management project. County's got 17,000 acres of vector. And anytime a marsh is reconstructed or has damage and has to be rebuilt or whatever, or restored, that's one of the preferred ways of doing things.
Yeah.
With an extensive criteria associated with how to do that. I mean, 15 different techniques, major reviews. We treat each marsh as a separate entity.
Yeah.
Now that's the concept is runnels, fresh water off, salt water in.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks. And right, we talked a little bit about improving water quality. This is the something from the Corwood Park study showing how sometimes it shows how large a watershed area impacts, drains into Stony Brook Harbor, and then the velocity. Some significant vertical relief here, and the velocity that pours in means that there's really no filtration occurring in that last at the end of that. And so building some sort of retention ponds, methods to allow some of these nutrients and sediments to subside before the water flows into the water system. There also is room for education and locals working on it. There's a number of, there's a Suffolk County Septic Improvement Rebate Program if people are having trouble with their septic. And the Long Island Garden Rewards Program, which is rewarding like rain gardens and things like that, that will help people with their lawns reduce the amount of nutrients that are going into the sound, the harbor. Sorry. All right, another thing we can do when you're looking at planning, planning for marsh migration may become important because what happens when sea levels rise is that marshes potentially can migrate into adjacent upland areas. And unfortunately, just like last week, the news about the Greenland glaciers is not looking great. Unfortunately, I feel like sea level rise is becoming more and more a likelihood than just a possibility. And so there were two areas. This is where the online tool that I was talking about comes in handy. There are two areas which we found looking at this, where there are some areas where there are dry lands that have the potential for significant marsh habitat. North of West Meadow Creek, there's some public lands up there. Oldfield Club, some Suffolk County lands. So these are places that, in terms of public policy, there's going to be some choices that have to be made. Are these lands going to be protected with berms, hardened seawalls, or is there a place for allowing marsh to migrate to expand their habitat? Certainly that would be probably a less expensive option, although you'd lose the resource. And then north, Stony Brook Harbor north in the village there, there are also some expansion. If there's interest and I have a chance, I can demonstrate that tool and we can look at those locations at the end of the meeting. And there's a lot of ways a lot of local regulations that can take place, and the local towns have a lot of control over what happens to their shoreline. There's a New York State Department of State model local laws to increase resilience 2019, a resource that I just want to call attention to. I think that's all I want to say about that for now. There's 2 pages also in the report of funding sources. So if you get a group together, of different towns, different entities that want to try to do this, it's going to cost money, and so there's some information about that. Both local, New York State, and federal funding sources are discussed in there. And the interesting thing about these funding sources is they range all the way from the grant writing assistance. So like if you're getting started but you need to actually write the grant, to hire a consultant, there are potentially funds available for that. Then there are funds available for engineering and planning, and then funds for actual implementation for shovel-ready products. So I recommend you look in there. And then one of the things there, the New York State Funding Finder, which is a tool that also, it's another list of funding sources. So there's a lot of resources. If you have something you're interested in, I recommend looking at that and working with that. Finally, at the back of the report, there are some summaries of the impact of sea level rise on marshes from the modeling. This is sort of from phase 1 of the project. So for every one of the defined marshes that I showed at the beginning, we produced these fact sheets showing where the marshes are most vulnerable, where they might migrate to. Now, of course, in the fact sheets, you can't click on a specific tax parcel and get information about what's happening there. You have to go on the online tool for that. But those are at the end of the document. No, I think that might be it. Oh yeah, this is the one of the types of maps that are on the appendices and in the online viewer are these probability maps, and these take into account uncertainty in sea level rise, because we don't know exactly whether we're going to have sea level rise at the end of the century, somewhere between half a meter and 2 meters, I think, is pretty much what the uncertainty, and that's what NOAA suggests, and that's what a lot of the scientists find as well. And so that is the biggest uncertainty that's driving what's going to happen with marshes, where they're going to migrate and whether they're going to persist. But there are other uncertainties, such as how much sediment they're going to accumulate, what the tide range is going to change. So within the model, we varied all of these things simultaneously and ran the model hundreds of times. And this was sort of the likelihood that marshes would persist in different locations. It's just another tool that's available. That might be the last slide. Oh yeah, so why am I bringing this to you? Because I would love to get your comments and feedback, and also comments and feedback from any of the public. But we're running down to the end of this project, and we had some delays, and so we kind of need comments on the document by the end of November in order, because I need to have this whole thing wrapped up by the end of December. So I need to incorporate all of that. And so I can get comments, any feedback or discussion of this meeting, I'll try to incorporate into the document to the best of my ability. My email address is there as well. And what we do is we write up a responsiveness summary for each of the comments. So I think most of them in the past, 90% resulted in a change in the document, to reflect the comment. In some cases we didn't, because maybe they were a comment about something that was not directly in the topic of the report. But we're hoping to get this feedback, hopefully you all have a copy of the document electronically. If you don't, the URL is in this presentation, but if you give me your email address, I will get it out